Thank you, everyone, for joining us today at day one of the UNESCO-DCMÉT Symposium. We are so happy to have you here, and we invite you to visit the website and follow us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and several others. My colleagues will be sharing information in the chat, and we're grateful to share time and space with you today. This session is entitled Emboldening Democratic Pedagogies About Media and Justice Through Critical Media Literacy and Peer Teaching. My name is Dr. Andrea Gambino, and I'm here today with my wonderful colleagues and co-creators, Dr. Jeff Scher, Kaylee, Jennifer, Vanessa, and Anna, who will all also introduce themselves in this presentation. As co-creators and in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, lands, and waters, we would like to pay our respects to the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples, who are the original land caretakers of Tovangar, Southern Channel Islands, and Southern Channel Basin. And my colleague Jennifer Ramos will also be dropping a link in the chat. We encourage you throughout this conference, there will be many conversations about indigeneity and ways that we can be in better reciprocity with Indigenous peoples and Mother Earth. And so we encourage you to engage in that critical self-reflection and reciprocity with us throughout this conference and beyond. Today, we also want to provide context. We are all faculty or alumni and former students of University of California, Los Angeles. Jeff, could you provide context about the courses?
Absolutely, thank you. I just noticed in the chat, though, it's mentioned that the interpretation needs to be activated. Has that happened?
Yep, just working on that now. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you, Jeff. If folks would like to engage in this session, we have a wonderful interpretation team who will be providing that in Spanish. So please feel free that as soon as my colleague Miranda McKee enables it, click the globe on your Zoom toolbar and you can select Spanish as well. And that'll be available in a moment. Go right ahead, Jeff.
Great. So we're all at we were all at one point at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, and taking different classes, some of them in critical media literacy, some of them in environmental justice. And this was started actually right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's still going on still today. Oh, great. I see the interpretation has been activated. You can see that little globe at the bottom. So you can click on that if you want to hear it, listen in a different language. Thank you. So what happened was a response from COVID as we were seeing everything moving online and becoming very impersonal, recognizing we needed to find different ways, different types of pedagogy to help us come together and really support and learn together. And one of the responses was this idea of teaching each other, peer teaching. So rather than just me as the instructor being the only one kind of with all the power deciding what happens, looking for volunteers, students interested in stepping up and working with us to create lessons. And this was a process where in each class, at least a handful of people, students volunteered to meet with both me and Andrea. Andrea was working as my teaching assistant at the time, and plan. And so we would meet once a week in the evening outside of class time with these students on Zoom, and we would plan, we would brainstorm, what do they think we should be addressing? And then how can we go ahead and build a lesson that's going to be active? It won't be a lecture, but it'll be including all their students in the process of learning together through creating and through different type of hands-on type of activities. And that's what you're going to be hearing about today, is their different experiences. And we have several different experiences because this went on for several years, and each quarter classes did different things with it.
That's right. Thank you, Jeff. And contextually, a little more about critical media literacy. It expands our understanding of literacy. So when we're discussing this, we're talking about reading, writing, speaking, listening, from print-based text to images to photographs, all types of information, and engaging with popular culture. And additionally, what we are really going to be emphasizing today in examples from our peer teachers is that critical media literacy helps us critically analyze, but also create our own media. And this helps us ask inquiry-based questions that look at systemic issues of power, but also questioning the difference and relationship between power and knowledge. And so we're critically thinking, we're working together, and we're thinking about how media provides representations of class, gender, race, sexuality, as well as other forms of identities that socialize us into thinking about who we are and who we can become. And so critical media literacy helps us engage in deconstructing, unlearning, but also relearning by creating our own media that is more socially and environmentally just, which my colleagues will give wonderful examples of today. One common misconception is when we hear the word critical is, okay, so we're going to only be engaging in deep critique. Well, we also celebrate positive representations as well. And you'll see that in examples today. And we also still are engaging in that critique, but what it's really about is recognizing that media are never neutral. It is always subjective, including our interpretation. So it's about negotiating those complexities of information as we engage in it and engage in critical dialogue with each other. Jeff?
Sure. So an interesting piece that I've been learning a lot in the last few years really comes from Antonio Lopez's work on eco-media literacy. And he's been writing books and doing amazing research about the role of the connections, the role of media in terms of our understandings and our relationships to the natural world. And what we've been trying to do then is combine these different classes. So I have one class that just looks at environmental justice and another class that just looks at critical media literacy. And yet in both classes, we touch on both of them. So we look at environmental justice through the lens of media and critically questioning the ways these representations are constructed. And we look at critical media literacy through the lens of environmental justice to look at how interconnected everything really is. Even our own media tools have a carbon footprint, and understanding and recognizing the interrelationships and the need to be questioning, especially these big concepts of worldviews and ideologies, because that's what frames the systems and the structures and the policies and everything else that comes from it. So trying to kind of push away from this individualistic idea that it's just, pick up your trash, to looking at more, what are the systems at play and how is media reinforcing the problem or challenging it? And so this is really kind of the key intersection that our students engage with.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, and the critical media literacy framework?
So this is the framework that we use. It's a framework that I didn't invent. It's really been built over the years by many different scholars all around the world, from the theorists in Germany at the Frankfurt School to people in England, Canada, Australia, all over the globe. And these are the ideas. On the left side, you'll see these conceptual understandings. Those are the big theoretical lenses that we work with and try to help people really kind of understand very intimately about the social construction, about the politics of representation, about the way media function. But then on the right are the guiding questions. And this is what we use with students. And we use this with students from kindergarten all the way through university. For younger students, we'll reword the questions to make them more culturally or developmentally appropriate. But the process here is all about inquiry. It's an inquiry-based process to encourage people to question and then create alternative, different versions than the dominant perspective. So this is very much different than just looking at, is it true or false, which has been kind of an unfortunate detour that some people doing media literacy have been focused just on fake news. This is much more. This is also helping people recognize the authenticity, but more than that, it's about questioning bias, questioning the normalization of how media tend to shape and create the ideas that some things are normal, in quotes, and some things aren't. So this is a framework, a tool, hopefully could be helpful for you as well.
Thank you, Jeff. And our colleague Jennifer will drop into chat various iterations in multiple languages of this framework. So we hope you'll adapt this on your own, as well as share it with teachers, colleagues, and community members. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Jeff. So just like Jeff was talking to us about how critical media literacy can help us really kind of disrupt and push back on a lot of traditional forms of education. Today we're proposing a model of peer teaching that is long range. Many of us as educators and engaged community members often engage in collaborative dialogue, and here you'll see some examples from our classes with students where they're working in small collaborative teams as a regular process of working together to analyze media, to create their own, as you see in the top middle, making counter advertisements related to environmental justice and sustainable clothing. But these are representative of shorter term exercises, very similar that we often use in the classroom, like think, pair, share, or to engage in a small group short-term project. The difference that we want to highlight and propose today is where Jeff and I have worked together to try to disrupt hierarchies of power that often place teachers and educators as the sage on the stage and students as passive learners. And so shifting in our mindset to facilitators, this 5-step peer teaching process that is very adaptable can help provide a different, longer range opportunity where students can really take the reins of the class, work together, and practice being the teachers and being the facilitators and guides of their own peers. So I will highlight the first 2 steps in the process. And this is a photograph from our very first peer teaching experience with students in the heart of the acute phase of COVID-19 lockdowns, with one of our colleagues, Jennifer Ramos, pictured in the bottom left, who's with us here today. And so as Jeff mentioned, this was really a means where we were striving to cultivate community in a time of vast distance. And one way we did that was by incorporating one-on-one short interviews with every single student and asking Jeff's former students, how would you feel about developing a lesson and teaching your peers? And these phenomenal people were the first people to do it. And what's crucial here is cultivating a caring community. And so that's where you're holding space and you're really developing deep interpersonal bonds and relationships that are trusted with your students. An additional portion of that is recognizing and celebrating your students' identities, their inherent wisdom, their passions, and their propensity for leadership. And the only way to figure that out is to be able to have conversations one-on-one and throughout your courses where you're constantly checking in. And so here in this photograph on the right, when we were meeting online, this was the way that we would always start off. After we made this decision to become a peer teaching group with these 8 students, then it always began this way. And over time, we continued to really kind of learn more of their interests, and that factored into their lessons. Jeff is going to share the next 3 steps.
So what we were trying to do, and this was kind of the challenge for us, is to guide as facilitators without kind of telling them what to do and taking over, because we really wanted this to be a form of empowerment and where they were really determining, being student-centered. So as much as we could, we stepped back and gave them the scaffolds, the tools, whatever they needed so that they could run the meetings, run the planning. But we were there every week. And most of these peer teaching sessions didn't happen until almost 2 months worth of planning ahead of time, meeting weekly. It was a lot of work on them. It was all extra. We gave them a little bit of extra credit points in the class, but really this came out of a passion of love for them because this required so much more work. But that was our goal. And as much as we could, it was their project. And this was something that was very obvious when they did the teaching, is that the students connected with them. They related to them in ways they never did with me one-on-one, right? And there were students, I was really amazed, who throughout most of the course never spoke up. When I would ask questions, they would never raise their hands. But when the peers were teaching and leading the lessons, they were involved, they were speaking, they were participating in a way I never saw that before. So I saw so much really wonderful advantage here. And it was because they trusted each other. There was a community that had been built, and the students really just flourished with that and connected with their peers.
Thank you, Jeff. And part of that long-term planning that Jeff was mentioning also requires the teacher and the facilitators to allocate ample class time for students to integrate their lesson. And additionally, at the end of each lesson, students always engaged in critical reflection together about the learning process. So here again, we see that the core of critical media literacy, yes, it's analysis, it's alternative media production, it's both challenging systemic injustice as well as celebrating positive representations, but it's also all about that process rather than a product or outcome. And now I will turn it over to our peer teachers who will demonstrate this process beautifully. Jennifer Ramos, it's all you.
Thank you, Dr. Gambino. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jennifer Ramos, and I graduated from the University of California, Los Angeles, class of 2021. And I participated in the peer teaching experience by creating eco-poems with our class, and this was during the winter of 2021. So essentially, we started with two different topics for the class, one of them being environmental racism and its impact on communities, and the second being biophilia, really the focus of the love of nature. Prior to our session, we did have homework for the students, and that was allowing them to bring in images or drawings that represent the topic. And then I do want to keep in mind that this did happen throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, which came with its own challenges, which I will discuss in a further slide. Next, Andrea. Thank you. And the process of our eco-poems started the day of our peer teaching experience with a student who read an example of an eco-poem they created for the class. And this provided an example of what we were looking for, but most importantly, it provided students the ability to start thinking creatively of how they would structure their poem, what they could do, and just be as creative as possible. Students were then told the instructions and were divided into 4 breakout rooms, 2 breakout rooms per topic. Each breakout room had 2 facilitators. One facilitator really focused on engaging the students, keeping that discussion and conversation open and honest, while the second facilitator focused on writing everything down, capturing all the creativity and discussion. In total, there were about 7 to 9 students per breakout room. And after we had those students' images, we opened it up in our breakout rooms to an honest discussion of what these images meant to the students. Students had the space to tell everyone a little bit more about each other, talk about their communities, talk about their families, getting to know each other beyond the classroom space, because we didn't just pose a question and allow for them to talk to their partner next to them, but it was more honest, it was more personal and intimate, which is very important because due to the COVID-19 pandemic, that intimacy, that personal connection with students was lost most of the time. So we did allow that safe space for them to connect with each other, to learn from each other, and to teach each other about their experiences surrounding climate and environmental racism and biophilia. Now, the second part of this was the poem creation. So taking 15 minutes to allow every student to think about what they wanted their poem to be. So each of them came up with 1 to 2 lines that they wanted to contribute to the poem, and then we shared what those lines were. Our second facilitator then wrote everything down, and together we rearranged the poem to how we wanted it to sound like, how we wanted it to represent our stories. And the last part of it was a class reflection, which really allows for the digestion of the experience. Reflection is such a crucial part because it permits everyone to engage again in honest conversation about what worked, what didn't work, what improvements could have been made. And really, it brings together the improvement of experiences for 3 sides of the spectrum: the student side, the peer teacher side, and the instructor side. And this is an example of the eco poem that we created.
A green space that is connected to home and access forbidden to many.
Artificial or natural, the effects are unequal.
Religious or not, the impact is universal. Political or not, the impact is consequential.
Taking a breath of fresh air only when I can afford it.
Use of highways and trash, but what about nature? We need our environment clean.
An association so dangerous, low income, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and environmental racism. At this rate, only the elite will thrive.
In the land of famine and separation, hands worshiping the soil, soil as dark as our skin, the soil sustains and saves us.
Let there be trees for everyone.
Let there be light for everyone.
Okay, I hope you all enjoyed that. Let's take us to the next slide, please. Now, this isn't where our peer teaching experience ended. It went far beyond that. And as 8 peer teachers that got together to teach this lesson, we remained very close to each other, but also to Dr. Scher and Dr. Gambino. And we kept on meeting up weekly to provide live updates and check-ins. And we became known as the Great 8. But we were also invited by Dr. Scher to contribute as co-authors for a book, the cover which you can see on the left-hand corner, titled For the Love of Nature, Eco-Writing the World. And let me leave this question to you all. In a vast college setting, how many students have the opportunity to say that they co-authored a book with their professor and their teaching assistant? And more importantly, that they formed meaningful relationships and mentorships with those same teachers and teaching assistants? The answer is not many. And this is why peer teaching is such a powerful tool that can really be used to create an even more powerful community of individuals who appreciate teaching, learning from one another, and reflecting space together. And with that, I turn it over to our colleague, Kaylee. Thank you all.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for sharing. To introduce myself, my name is Kaylee Morrissey. I graduated from the University of California, Los Angeles, this year, actually, 2023, and I was an English major and an education studies minor. So I've had the privilege to participate in peer teaching multiple times in Dr. Scher's classes, but the activity today I specifically want to talk to you all about that I was part of was facilitating the creation of environmental justice TikToks that I collaborated with my peers on. And at this moment, I had not taken Dr. Scher's environmental justice class yet, but many of my peers have, and they were incredibly helpful in laying out the foundation of environmental justice and how that relates to critical media literacy. And even though I was familiar with some of those topics, I did not have as much of a foundation as my peers did, but I did have familiarity with using the social media platform TikTok for previous classes and to create videos related to social justice in other ways. But there was a lot of conversation between me and my peers about what was most important for students to know before engaging in this activity within the classroom. And we did provide Google Slides for the students with the following information. So first, we wanted to ensure that all of the students understood why they were creating TikTok specifically. So we did want to explain how TikTok can be a powerful tool in fighting for environmental justice. It is a platform that many environmental activists have used to counter common myths pertaining to the climate crisis. And it is also a way of simplifying complex concepts so that they are easier to understand, but also initiate those difficult conversations. Additionally, we did want to provide TikTok video tutorials. Even though TikTok is an incredibly popular platform, especially among my generation, we decided that we did not want to assume that everybody in the class was already familiar with TikTok or that there would be one person in a group that would be familiar. So we decided to create video tutorials that would familiarize students with different features, different ways of editing or how to include sound. And additionally, we also wanted to provide examples of TikToks that did address an environmental justice topic so that the students could have an idea of what we would expect. And I do have an example for you all on the left that I created, so I'll go ahead and let that play. So in the TikTok, initially, I had presented environmental activism, and it had a cheering reaction from the audience because on the surface, environmental activism does appear as a good thing, as people genuinely wanting to make a difference in solving the climate crisis. However, there are many people who will use the image of environmental activism to perpetuate environmental racism or direct blame to individuals versus corporations. So the example of that I had used in my clip was people or corporations who would focus on individuals who could not afford to be vegan or who could not afford to live a sustainable lifestyle otherwise, instead of attributing blame to corporations and attributing blame to first world nations who are more wasteful in comparison to the global South, who does receive a lot of blame for having many children. So with that, I wanted to emphasize how those efforts are not necessarily productive in combating the climate crisis. And then with that, my peers were essentially helpful in providing a list of environmental justice topics that the students could reference if they felt stuck on what they wanted to address or what to create. However, they were not specifically limited to that list. It was more so a guide to allow them to think. And then with that, we did provide links to popular TikTok sounds, just because if there are students who are not as familiar with the platform, they may not be aware of popular or trendy sounds on the platform. And again, that's not something that they were necessarily confined to, but just as a guide for the creation of their videos. And then if any students wanted to further educate themselves on the climate crisis, we did provide a variety of articles they could read and videos they could watch as well. So I also want to talk about the process that the students had gone through in this activity. So first, the students did review the TikTok video tutorials we provided for them and the Google Slides presentation that did list those additional resources, those audios, those brainstorming topics if they would like. And then they had connected with their group partners, and they had 75 minutes to create a TikTok addressing any environmental justice concept or countering any common myths about the climate crisis. And they traveled to different locations on campus. We thought that it was really important that the students were actually in nature while partaking in this activity, because it is one thing to use logic to counter many of these myths and concepts, but at the same time, being outside did allow them to, in a way, form an emotional relationship with nature. And if you have that emotional aspect on top of the logical, you definitely feel more engaged in the kind of work that you're doing, and you're more likely to be committed in engaging in that work constantly. But we did allow them to travel to different locations on campus, and during this time, it was winter 2022, so it was a really interesting time on our campus. The vast majority of students who were participating in this activity were fortunate to be able to be with us in person. However, slowly transitioning from being online to in person throughout the height of the COVID-19 pandemic definitely brought about a lot of questions concerning accessibility and being able to form meaningful connections with other students in the classroom. So there were some students who were online, but their other group members were in person, and they were able to connect with other group members through Zoom as well as text message. And at the end, before I go into that, if the students had a lot of time left over after creating their initial TikTok, they were strongly encouraged to make additional TikToks. And at the end, we actually found that the vast majority, if not all of the groups, had made more than one TikTok. So I think that communicated to us that the students really did enjoy that activity, because it was only an option for them to create additional videos, but they voluntarily did that. And at the end, all of the students not only got to see their TikTok video broadcasted in front of the whole class, but they were able to watch their other peers' creations as well and reflected on what the process was like for them. And we felt that many of the students definitely appreciated being able to use TikTok, especially because it's not something that they have had the opportunity of using for a class assignment before. And it is something that is not taken seriously. I think it's very easy to perceive social media as wholly negative or as a harm to one's mental health, but this assignment definitely brought about a new, refreshing perspective on social media. So with that, I did want to show you all some examples of what students in our class created and some other takeaways from this activity. I think something to address off the bat is that through addressing environmental justice concepts through a social media platform like TikTok, it does demonstrate literacy through humor, and it can make complex concepts easier to understand. And it just allows that message to be communicated to a greater amount of people. But at the same time, using TikTok for purposes of activism can empower students and make them feel like they do have a voice and a role in combating environmental and social injustices. And then first, I do want to show you all the examples that the students created. So I'll go ahead and let those play.
Like the grapes that thrive on the vine. Oye, Mariano on his way. Told me. I wish I had a time machine.
So in the first example that the students created, they were demonstrating greenwashing in their own communities, which is when institutions or corporations try to appear environmentally friendly, and when they actually aren't. So the example that the students had shown was our campus having different bins for composting, for recycling, and landfill. And usually they're supposed to be distinguished by colors, but they were all the same color, meaning that all of those bins were ultimately going to landfill. And how our campus is unfortunately not fulfilling their promise of being zero waste. But I think the ability to travel to different locations on campus has allowed students to understand the relevance of environmental justice to their own communities and affirm that this is something that does impact them, but also understanding that relevance will allow them to be more engaged in advocating for environmental justice. And then as for the second TikTok example, this was an instance of a group that was hybrid. So most of the students were in person, but you can see the one student on the phone through Zoom. And I think this really emphasizes how being accessible does not have to take away from the message that the students were communicating. So in the clip, they write, when companies realize they've polluted the planet past the point of no return, and then the audio was singing, "I wish I had a time machine." And it's a very short clip, but it does a really effective job in emphasizing the role that corporations play in the climate crisis, that it is time sensitive, and that they aren't taking any accountability for it, or there is little accountability for it, and they may not face it until it becomes too late, or there's not much else that we can do. But otherwise, everybody in the group was able to be included despite the physical barriers that may come with in-person versus online learning. And then the last major takeaway I had from this peer teaching activity was understanding the relationship between educators and students. There was an instance where we were going around all of the groups, checking in with everybody. And there were some students who taught me about TikTok features that I actually was not aware of before, just because I never needed to use them on the app for whatever reason. And at first I was a little bit embarrassed that I wasn't able to help the students directly. However, after that happened, I reflected a bit more on it, and it affirmed that learning is not one-sided. And it is a really good thing that those students were able to be active in their education, because I remember in my K-12 education, something that I did resent a lot was feeling like some of the assignments that I was doing didn't have much purpose, or that I didn't have an active role and I was just passively receiving information from some of my teachers. But I think not only does students having an active role will allow them to be more engaged, but I also think it allows them to build community and trust with educators on a new level. And I was really glad that that is something that was able to come out of this peer teaching activity. And with that, I would like to pass it over to Anna and Vanessa.
Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa Reyes. I graduated this year from the University of California, Los Angeles, class of 2023. My major was education and social transformation. I got to do environmental justice spring of 2023 and also critical media winter of 2022. A big part of the critical media was able to take the baton from Dr. Scher and be able to do peer teaching in our CDML class and also in our environmental justice class, which is what we got to do. I was able to introduce the CDML, the CDML chart that they left the link on under. So that critical media framework was a big part of our presentation. And the way we introduced our presentation with our class, we decided to do an ABC advertising. So with that helps students know that advertising is everywhere, and they were able to guess what the letter represented. So it would be like A is for Amazon, B is for Barbie. And it got students, to be able to have a little bit of understanding what we were going to go over and questions they had about the media and marketing, the strategy.
And hello, my name is Anna Baricki, and I graduated in June of 2023 with a degree in psychology and education studies minor. And I'll be going over the other portion of our presentation since Vanessa and I happen to share this peer teaching experience. And yeah, so not only did we go over the critical media literacy guide in a way that's kind of fun and introduces us to the concept that we should be aware that media is trying to influence us from everywhere, we also talked about culture jamming as it, is a movement that criticizes and parodies consumerism by, pointing out various flaws that our current systems of like mass advertising, promotions, or just even like shipping, etc., exists, and pointing out those flaws often in like a funny, subverting way, which is why we decided to focus on doing ad busting for our peers, because companies are using advertisements to actively like market an ideal image of themselves. And when it relates to the environment, sometimes they'll greenwash, in which they will attempt to appear more eco-friendly than they actually are. So we were asking them to search for an example of a company greenwashing their product in some way, and actually delve into sharing the facts and creatively disrupt the narrative.
Thank you, Anna. So we created our Google Slides. We were able to share Google Slides with the whole class. After going over the framework and breaking down each part of the framework, we created an activity that was going to be based off ad busting. There was a poster, just like Anne mentioned. So they were able to grab a poster that was greenwashing or saying they were eco-friendly, like a brand. Like for our example would be Sheen or Coca-Cola, and they were able to go ahead and change it up to see what they thought was what they actually meant. And we gave our students time to go ahead and be in pairs and in different groups where they were able to choose, and we came back and we met up to see how the activity went and to ask those questions and to see what they really found that was fascinating and they didn't know about, because a lot of us were very surprised that so many brands do greenwash, and we were all very surprised by it.
Anna, your mic.
Sorry about that. Also, can we re-share the slides if possible? But I'm about to go describe some of our examples of what we actually did. Can we go back to that slide that we were just on? I meant like refresh the whole presentation, if you could check the chat.
Oh, I'm so sorry, I couldn't see the chat.
No worries. So for our student ad busting, we asked them to look into those companies, just like Vanessa was saying. So one example in our top left corner is Shein, which you may know as it is a popular kind of shipping place that gets cheaper products from typically Asia and ships them all over depending on their quality. But they've been saying that they're changing the game and evolutionizing shipping and packaging, despite the fact that a lot of their products are still either ending up in the landfill because they break really quickly, or even their packaging materials aren't as recyclable as they claim. As well as the promotion of driving these cars that claim to be eco-friendly, are actually still wanting to just make their car company seem more friendly, despite still causing a lot of damage to the planet due to having to use gas in personal cars instead of looking for alternative systems like public transport. And as you could see, the students would like actively cross out their claims and talk about like the dumping grounds that were happening, or even on the lower examples have quotes from different articles saying things that the company may be saying that their water bottles may now be thinner, but they are still using millions of barrels of oil to produce those thinner bottles that are still getting dumped mostly into landfills or the oceans. So it was really important for our group to just look into what companies are claiming regarding their eco-friendly products, and we could praise them if they are doing well, but oftentimes it was just a marketing strategy that our peers started to tear apart based off of further research.
Thank you, Anna. So our results were our students were able, after doing our peer teaching, we had decided to let the students come up with us as well and present what they had created. We also, our group decided to do discussion questions, of course, but as mentioned below, not all were planned because the group discussion was valued more and we wanted to give students a bigger, like, to use their voices instead of ours. And the results were amazing because they were able to really do really good ad busting on their Google Slides, which were the examples we used before. Those they created more than we believed they knew because it was such a short time that the framework was given to them, but they understood it very quickly and they were able to give us the best results, and they left the class with understanding and now being more aware of what ad busting was, and we see it every day.
So this section, I wanted to provide kind of the student's perspective of all the different benefits of peer teaching by having like a little small edited version of like our plan for the actual schedule. So we took over a whole class session and divided it but amongst the people who volunteered in that group to introduce the framework, explain greenwashing, present examples of ad busting, and just, motivate them to think creatively about how they could become active in pursuing either further activism through ad busting or even just recognizing in their daily lives the advertisements that are trying to believe something, be it being more eco-friendly or even just, wanting to seem like a better product, even though they don't necessarily have to back those claims in those advertisements. So we were really lucky to like show them those skills to think critically and look into why they are presenting such products as that, as consumerism will have consequences. And trying to be the most eco-friendly is definitely a great way to live. So the structure that required our presentation to go well, we had to make that class plan / guideline to follow on, which is presented in the left. And all of this process was democratic, considering us students mostly had the reins. Sure, Dr. Cher and Dr. Andrea were both there to give us insight each week, but we would be visiting our smaller groups more than just that 1 week at a time and try and bring different insights from our own perspectives of what we find important. It was also important for all of our sessions to include multiple forms of engagement, be they videos demonstrating the problem or interactive games such as the ABCs showing just how ubiquitous companies are. And also using more structured learning like the analysis or use of social media to make sure that learning is not just something that is restrained to one classroom setting and instead takes place throughout our lives. Also, adaptability needs to be prioritized as all of our presentations were taking place throughout us figuring out the COVID-19 pandemic. So sometimes plans would either have to be canceled because we couldn't meet in person, or it's just not functional if we expect everyone to be able to, stay well during a global pandemic and actively participate. So making sure that there was ways people could join online and still participate and provide their insights was very important. I also believe that voluntary group work for creating these peer groups to teach to other students is best, as everyone was passionate about what we were teaching and brought something new to the table. And I really want to emphasize that you tie multiple topics together with one lesson that is relevant to group members, because I really wanted to talk about greenwashing and ad busting, and I was lucky that everyone else did too. So we were able to divvy it up based off of interests. But a lot of these examples you've seen today are regarding activism, actively using your social media understanding and your prowess to show other people that learning is not just in the classroom and that there are structural inequalities that we should be aware of in order to confront.
Wow. Okay, so we're about to enter question and answer. For anyone who's interested in learning more about critical media literacy, Jennifer will provide the open access critical media literacy research guide that Jeff, myself, and our colleague Fran, a research librarian, help moderate. But truly, so much of what's represented here is inspired by students at UCLA and colleagues around the world. So we encourage you to use and adapt this with your own communities. And now we want to open up the floor and hear from our peer teachers and from all of you any questions that come to mind. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other. But first, a round of applause for the peer teachers. Aren't they extraordinary? Yes, amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Jeff, for bringing us all together. We appreciate you. All right, so anyone who has questions, feel free to unmute yourselves or type into the chat. We'll love to hear from you.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for sharing, this kind of in-depth experience that you've had, and also I really appreciate the collaboration that so clearly became central to these projects. And I think what's really valuable there is the change in hierarchy and dynamics that typically evolve in a classroom, and the challenging of that is something that creates really beautiful opportunities for learning in welcoming spaces and spaces where people are encouraged to be creative and think about new ways to handle these problems that we're all tasked with facing, including issues of environmentalism, issues in the media, and using critical thinking to do so. So really tremendous, and thank you to all of you for sharing this. And I was wondering if any of you can share perhaps some of the troubleshooting moments that you've had when attempting to champion others in the room, and perhaps it's student to student, and perhaps in some cases it's with professor to student, when perhaps the comfort level of an individual isn't really right there for taking the lead, and how can you encourage those dynamics despite that hesitancy, as it's sometimes simply just new territory.
I can definitely take the lead on this question because I saw it so often in a virtual environment, right? So even getting students to turn their camera on was one of the hardest obstacles that we experienced. So how do you get students to, if they don't want to turn their camera on, how do you encourage them to participate? And you have to start with the facilitators, making sure the facilitators turn their cameras on, they're friendly, they're smiling, but they're also reminding the students when they can, hey, if you guys feel comfortable, turn your cameras on or unmute yourselves. It's these little reminders that slowly, 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, then you see more faces, and then you see the mics coming off. So again, it's just being friendly and it's being compassionate. And once we heard those stories, everybody started participating. We realized that not all students were in the same page as everyone else. Everybody was dealing with their own thing. So being compassionate, understanding, and meeting people where they at is one of the biggest things that you have to do as a peer teacher.
Okay, I'd also like to speak on that point, where if it's not just your peers, as in like the students that you're kind of collaborating with, and the actual the actual people that are making the class plan with you, if they're feeling nervous about taking the lead and speaking in front of the rest of our peers, I found it very important to always offer your own experience and just say, hey, you're working on this section that you really believe in. And if you're ever worried that you're going to mess up or misspeak or forget something, we're here to have your back and jump in and kind of re-express it in the presentation later. Because our main points we clearly lay out in our teaching guide. And if they aren't always expressed at the right time or like the scheduled time, the rest of the class won't know. We could always jump back to it and implement everything that we want to say.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. A question in the chat from Justin Brown. Could you give a quick list of the technology that the students use to collaborate across multiple physical spaces? Yeah. Anyone want to take this?
Yeah, so I can talk about the TikTok environmental justice activity specifically. So honestly, all that the students had needed was the TikTok app on their phone, and that's where they had created everything, where they were able to record their video, they were able to edit, they were able to add audio, and then save it to their phone. And then the way that they were able to share the content that they created with the class was through a shared Google Drive. So as soon as they were finished with their video or videos, they uploaded it to the shared Google Drive folder. And once all of the students' creations were in there, we were able to project it in the classroom for everybody to watch.
And then for Minds and Anna, we decided to create a Google Slide, so everybody had the link to it. All they needed was their laptop, or even if they had their phone with them, they were able to add on their ad busting. And there was multiple people in groups. There was a group of 4, so each group had people of 4. And after that, they came up, and then we had our projector on, and our laptop was connected, so we were able to use Google Slides and then go on to show everyone's results.
Yeah, and additionally, Jeff and I would like to commend the peer teachers, because during these different periods of fluctuation, remote, in-person, and hybrid, it was my and Jeff's first time teaching hybridly. And because of our students, it was made possible to become more accessible. As you saw in Kaylee's video, the TikTok with their peer on FaceTime, it didn't miss a beat. And so it was always a priority for the peer teachers to make sure their peers were with them on Zoom, with them on FaceTime, but always together and supporting one another, especially in their mental health and, of course, in their holistic well-being. So we appreciate you all really partnering with us in that, and for championing these things and demonstrating how it can be done. Other questions from folks? Yeah, Kaylee, go ahead.
All right, so this isn't as much of a question, but I just wanted to draw on something that Anna said that I really appreciated hearing, and I think is such a huge takeaway, because Anna was talking about how learning is not something that is limited to the classroom, and how social media can be a space for activism. And I think especially lately, I've seen many people have grievances with Instagram infographics or any other kind of social media activism. And honestly, this is something that I have even had a grievance with in the past, and I would be critical of it, not necessarily in a way that was directly engaging with the content of some of these posts, but rather just that it was social media. But I do really appreciate what Anna said, and I just wanted to highlight that point, because it is especially important to talk about social and environmental justice on social media, because especially when the variety of the news and information that we receive is bought by corporations, it's only going to show one or a few kinds of perspectives that are in the interests of profit. And the way that we as everyday consumers and people can get our voice across is social media. And even if it is a small step, I think that is something that is really important and can draw the right people to certain causes. So I just wanted to comment on that point you made, Anna, and how I really appreciate it and how important it really is, especially today.
Definitely. I think social media is one of the best ways to connect people to grassroots movements because it's a group of passionate people coming together under a specific umbrella to make a change. So if you're on social media and you see like examples of your college specifically not following the regulations of like the trash cans or not actively taking care of the promises that they've said they'll meet by like 2025, it can help organize people to recognize there's a problem and, you know, come together and pressure the people that are in charge. And I definitely think that being able to show that your creativity in a classroom setting could be spread farther is very important.
And I think this gives us a chance to spread awareness everywhere, you know, from having it in a course and, you know, we are peer teaching each other, which later on leads to everyone going out to their friends and talking about it outside of class and posting about it, which spreads the word even more.
I want to just say a big thank you to these students who taught me so much and just are so inspiring. Our future looks good because of you.
I second that, Jeff. They are everything and so brilliantly leading these efforts for social and environmental justice and championing so much in their communities locally and globally. And we appreciate all you do. Our gracious hosts from UNESCO are offering to extend our session for a little bit, so we do have time for one more question. If there's not another question, I have one for us. But anyone that has any questions, please do feel free to ask or type in the chat. Okay, my question for you all is, how has peer teaching changed you? And that includes for ourselves too, Jeff, as instructors, as co-instructors. So just a little soundbite before we go. Yeah, Anna, you want to launch us off?
Yeah, I just think peer teaching is such a great experience for students to have the chance to figure out if they want to go into teaching. And something that I find incredibly valuable is that we had a lot of focus on activities that make class fun. Because I'm sure we've all been in a classroom that's pure lecture and you're dozing off 20 minutes in and you're not engaging with the material. By mixing things up, including videos, activism, and creative opportunities, it showed me that if I am to be in teaching settings, I want to be a teacher that's engaging and helps show the people that I'm teaching that they have skills that they can actively demonstrate and use for change if they'd like.
It also, you know, I think just like Anne says, it gives you a little like, you know, how professors have to go about things, and Dr. Sher gives us that little piece where advice where he's like, go ahead and take on. And I think it was amazing because most of our courses that we took in with him, you know, we would go outside and everybody was so engaging and everybody wanted to share their opinion. And it was an open space where we were able to do that. And we were able to learn from each other and just not like the professor gave us that opportunity. And I think I'm so thankful for Dr. Sher for that because we learned from each other so much. And it, you know, I hope that that becomes a big thing, that peer teaching is available for every course that is, you know, everyone should deserve to have their voice be heard, especially when it comes to a subject that they're passionate about.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, I would like to build off of what Anna and Vanessa said about the experiential aspect of teaching, because teaching education is always something that I have been passionate about, but in a way it was something that I felt distance from in the act of teaching it didn't really seem that near me, or I just thought of it more as more of an idea as opposed to an action. But this is really the only time in my undergraduate experience I have had the privilege of being able to do something like this, and in the process form community with other members in my class, both those who did help me facilitate the peer teaching lesson, but also those who were students. And I think it just reaffirmed the power of experiential knowledge. And, you know, while there is a lot to learn, whether that's through books, whether that's through articles, videos, etc., I definitely learned a lot from my peers and their own experiences and how they are relevant to social and environmental justice. And I think just seeing how these issues affect, maybe they don't directly affect me, but how they affect others in my own community has definitely only encouraged my passion to advocate for others and just show a different perspective that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
Yes, I can definitely second that, Kaylee, and all the other comments that were said. Most importantly, I think that when you foster student autonomy in the ways that Dr. Scher and Dr. Gambino have done time after time again, you create a classroom of leaders who are ready to take over the world and learn from each other. And I think that's the biggest thing that we all want to remember. We keep on learning from each other. We keep on learning because that never ends. And when we realize that that never ends, education becomes really fun. It becomes a fun process, and you don't think about the product as much as you think about the process. So thank you, Dr. Gambino and Dr. Scher, for your wealth of knowledge.
Thank y'all. Jeff, closing thought?
Everything that was said, I couldn't top anything. Just want to add on just what an honor it's been to be able to learn with you all. It's been really such a highlight and so meaningful. So thank you.
Yeah, and I echo that. I mean, I think that these teachers and Dr. Scher have all demonstrated the power that can come from forming communities with one another that are deep, that are meaningful, rooted in respect and care, as we negotiate discovering deeper criticality about the world around us while also engaging in critical self-reflection. And so we hope you'll continue learning with us about critical media literacy, social and environmental justice. Thank you to our wonderful host from UNESCO. We hope that you'll come back for day 2. We would also like to extend special thanks to Miranda McKee and Mary Lou and our fabulous interpreters who are working tirelessly to make this conference accessible around the world. And I'd also like to shout out our beautiful families who are in attendance tonight. We appreciate you dearly. This is not possible without a tremendous global community, and so we really appreciate you all being here, and so we appreciate you greatly. So please do come on back tomorrow for day 2, and thank you all, and especially thank you peer teachers. Take care. Bye-bye.